Hello out there, everyone. This is Isidore Farish, and I have the pleasure of interviewing a very famous vegan by the name of Ellen Jaffe-Jones, who's from Florida, and she's got a bunch of books she's written. She does all kinds of different public uh, appearances, and she's been good enough to agree to do an interview with me, primarily about her vegan lifestyle and diet. So say hi, Ellen.
Hi, Isidore. How are you?
I'm doing good today. Thank you. Thank you. So, I just want the viewers to be up to speed on a couple of things. So, you've been a vegan for how long?
42 years. I always use my birthday as the point to change it because unlike, some of the younger kids, I didn't mark it on the calendar back then. And I had a few starts and stops like many of us did, having doctors who didn't get educated in nutrition at all in medical school, but all of a sudden became a nutritionist when you got pregnant. And they would say, oh, you're going to cause brain damage to your unborn child if you don't supplement with whey protein. Wait a minute. You want me to give the milk of another species to my unborn child? I mean, I didn't think to come back with that, of course, at the time, because they were the doctors. So there were a couple of starts and stops like that. But generally, 42 years, I've been a vegan, a runner, and knees are fine. And I just turned 70 a few days ago.
Yeah, look at you for 70. It's amazing. And you're in very good. Can I ask you, if you don't want to answer, it's fine. Your parents were long lived. You have good DNA in your family?
Yes and no. I mean, to define living, they both got heart disease in their 50s. My mom had one of the first stents. I mean, I don't know if she was an experiment or not, but it didn't work. At least, it never works unless you change your diet for starters, and then exercise hopefully comes, you feel so energetic like I did. So the answer is dad lived to 93, but he had diabetes and heart disease, and he did not have cancer. I look just like him, so I'm hoping those genes are not turned on at all. And because I've been told I actually did get told I had, this is just so crazy. I don't know if we want to go here or not, but I was told I had a rare form of leukemia about 2 years ago, and I didn't believe it because behind me you see what, as of last Saturday, was my 261st 5K or longer age group award since 2006, just on plants. And it became kind of this mission because I was told at a race once, somebody saw my vegan shirt and said, oh, you can't run on a vegan diet. I'm going, wait, what? And I have gotten such pushback over the years from people about running on a vegan diet you wouldn't believe. So this kind of became a mission, an obsession, whatever. And I'm racing almost every weekend in Florida that I can when there are races. So the let's see, my mom had, in addition to heart disease and diabetes, she got Alzheimer's, as did my grandmother. They both broke their hips. And, once it seems like women in particular break their hips, that's kind of it. They're in the nursing home from that point on. But I sometimes joke I came from the sickest family in America. It was really about, I was the youngest daughter of three daughters. So I had a lifetime to figure out what I didn't want to happen to me.
Right.
And my sister got breast cancer eventually three times, but she got it for the second time when I was 28. It was the same year I almost died of a colon blockage. And that's really when they rushed me to the hospital and said, we've never seen a colon blockage so large in somebody so young. You need to be on medication the rest of your life. I figured, I gotta figure this out. So I ran to the health food store, read all 5 books on fiber, because that's all there was at the time, and started just adding bran fiber to my diet, which made an amazing difference. And then I just started reading, started hearing the early talks of Dr. Neil Barnard, who's president of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And eventually the transition was macrobiotic, because that was a diet that was widely touted in the Asian culture for preventing surviving breast cancer. And it's kind of like a vegan diet, but just they include whitefish, and there's some vegan interpretations of it now. And then I really stopped doing it because there were all these other rules and regulations, like you could only eat foods that were in season. and that were only grown at your latitude. So as a Midwesterner, that meant I couldn't eat any citrus. And I just thought that doesn't really make sense for me right now. And being a TV reporter, I was a TV reporter for 18 years in Miami and St. Louis. And we were lucky to get a meal a day if we were working intensely in the business. So I felt lucky to drive through Taco Bell or someplace like that to get a bean burrito. And so vegetarian, then vegan was the progression.
Yeah, right. Me too. But I became vegan 28 years ago. And I didn't know that there were vegans like much before that. I
Well,
hadn't
we didn't use that word. We did not use that word.
I hadn't
Yeah.
really experienced the greater population, which included vegetarians and vegans at the time. So, but I started going to these gatherings and symposiums. I went to a couple of animal rights conventions in California. And then I used to go to this vegetarian Summerfest. It's now called the Vegan Summerfest. I'm sure you're familiar with it. You've been?
I've spoken there 4 times.
I
So
haven't been there recently, but anyway,
they haven't had it since COVID, sadly. It's
right.
just totally shut down.
But what I noticed, it was very conspicuous, is that the attendees were fit and trim, looked younger than their real age, were mentally, had great mental acuity. And you didn't see the walkers and the wheelchairs, and you didn't see the oxygen tanks or the oxygen generators. They just weren't there. I think I saw one wheelchair over many years, and this woman must have been like in her 90s. So that stood out in my mind as being, noteworthy. But what is your experience attending these? Is that more or less what you've seen when you've been to these vegan and vegetarian conventions and symposiums?
So Vegan Summerfest, and it was called Vegetarian Summerfest before that, I had always wanted to go to and never had, I just never had the opportunity until I wrote my first book, which was Eat Vegan on $4 a Day. And it still took an act of Congress to get me in as a speaker, because it's sort of known as summer camp for vegans, but all of the speakers that I'd been on the road with throughout my book tour, which by this time was 4 years, about 4 years into it, were at this event. Some of the more well-known, long-established doctors like Dr. Barnard, Dr. Greger, Dr. McDougall, they would be like the keynote speakers, the ones that would kind of kick off the event. And then the rest of us, it was held on a college campus over 4 days. So the rest of us then would be the curriculum, the speakers. And so people, unlike a Veg Fest, where for the most part, I was the only speaker in my time slot. You wouldn't have to make a choice between 3 or 4 other speakers, but it was like going to a university where you could do that. And so, and the other thing that, you didn't mention, which just really stood out to me, it was one of the most rigorous college campuses I've been on. I wouldn't say it was in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. It was gorgeous. So to go from one end of campus or to go hear, different speakers, you would be really, they gave, I think, 15 minutes between classes, just so that people could get from one end of campus to the other. And then, of course, it was all vegan food and wonderful, but they haven't, so many things have not opened up. I mean, many things have opened up, but the Veg Fest, for example, I used to be speaking sometimes at 2 a weekend, and they really haven't opened up. I mean, a few have, but I live in Florida, and so I've been very lucky. There are a couple of people who have spearheaded, not a great, they just really, Colleen Patrick Goudreau has a whole thing on the English language and the words that we use that are not animal friendly, and spearheaded is not one of them. All right, we'll just say taken the lead in organizing these things, and they are huge undertakings. I'm on the, well, I actually just recently resigned from the board of Florida Voices for Animals, because they put on the Tampa Veg Fest, and the organizer had a health issue this year, the president of the board. And so at the very last minute, like within a month, it fell on a lot of the board members to try and pick up the different roles that she had single-handedly been taking on for decades, doing these Veg Fest. So it's been the difference between a veg fest and Summerfest, for example, is Summerfest pretty much mostly people who were already vegan. And one of the reasons is it was pretty expensive even then, back in those days. You had to pay the registration. As a speaker, the only thing I got was my registration taken care of. I still had to pay my airfare to get there and to stay on campus for the duration of the week. So most of us, it was somewhat limiting in that regard. So when you say people were fit, I'm guessing they were a higher socioeconomic level and could afford to maybe do the things that other people in challenged areas cannot or have not been able to have access to, the food challenged areas. Veg Fest, on the other hand, I would say, and there have been some studies, roughly 50% vegan already, and the other 50% are vegan curious. So they're going to taste their food. They're going to hear the speakers. Usually when I have spoken at these events, somebody will come up to me and say, yeah, I wanted to hear about fitness. So they're coming with an agenda to try and figure it out, because it's usually not, for most of us, we weren't born vegan, although there are a few who have been, but there are baby steps into it and trying to figure out if it's okay, if it's healthy. Is it okay in your family of origin, which mine never was. They always called me the black sheep, and I got to bring the salad to the family events if I was invited late in life, unfortunately. And my dad and my mom and my dad were on board, but my sisters definitely not.
I see. So, would you say that, because I do some debating online, Facebook has a few vegan debate groups where they invite the meat eaters to come on and we spar with each other. But would you say that within the vegan community, or this has been my observation, I'm wondering if you agree, there's a few different subcategories of people who self-identify as vegan. And some are concerned primarily with diet and don't have great concern about animals. And others are kind of lazy vegans that don't adhere to the letter of the statutes, if you call them that. But then there's the zealot ones, and those are the ones that we'll find on the debate groups. And I'm constantly debating with both sides at the same time. It's amazing. But my purpose for being there is to debate with the meat eaters. And what I found is that, there's a lot of people who claim that, the vegan diet is ultimately going to be unhealthy, even if it's not in the short term. One person in that group says that there are no vegans over 70, or he uses the prerequisite that you have to be vegan from birth to qualify. So, it's an unreasonable request, because veganism didn't become normal until fairly recently. So it's rare that we see 70-year-old or 80-year-old vegans who were vegan since they were, infants. But these are the type of things we
28.
Yeah. Well, look, I saw you before you put your sweatshirt on. You've got big muscles. Okay. So, your skin looks great. You look young. For 70, I'd say you look about 58. Just
Thank you. Checks in the mail.
so, but the question was, I went all around the block. The question was, what is your impression about the different subcategories? Can you legitimately self-identify as a vegan? And not have all the bells and whistles working, not be an animal rights activist, as your primary goal.
So look, I think that the wonderful thing about our movement, for lack of a better word, is that the larger it gets, the more diverse it's going to become. And people are attracted to the vegan table for lots of different reasons. Certainly, I was attracted initially for health reasons, but once I saw one or two movies like Cowspiracy or Earthlings, some of the more, just Google the phrase factory farming. And if that isn't enough to make you give up animals, I don't know. I mean, there are different reasons people are attracted. And usually if it's for health, they'll often figure out the rest of it. The United Nations, I think that, the most important reason that we ought to be going vegan is we don't really have a lot of time left. The United Nations has said the number one thing we can do to reduce our carbon footprint is to give up factory farming and animal agriculture. So,
And it's more than carbon, it's methane.
well, yeah. I mean, that's just one of the things that the United Nations has focused on. And methane, absolutely right. There's so many videos and movies out there that show the detrimental environmental effects that factory farming and animal agriculture has. I mean, that's a whole nother hour. But in answer to your question, I mean, maybe because I was the youngest in my family and there were always lots of arguments, I think, growing up, and because I was the youngest, I mean, the truth is I was the only one who went to college of my sisters, and that created a whole lot of animosity. And I'm just happy we all get the same 24 hours in the day, and I gotta be doing this because that's my skill set, that's my talent. Seth Tibbett, who is the CEO of Tofurkey, started noticing my Facebook posts about when I would place in my age group. And he's written a bunch of things on my page when I do that, comparing me. He was actually, I don't know if he's writing a book or just doing some research on women in the 1800s and 1900s who were vegan and never used the word, never really knew what that was, but they, like Albert Einstein and some other people, just had the smarts to know that eating an animal, if you love one species, why would you kill and eat or maim another species? That it just, from an intellectual standpoint, didn't make sense. So that said, I mean, God love you for going out and arguing with people. I have no desire to do that anymore. At the age of 70, I know, because stress is a killer. And I actually have some genetic heart issues that, with the amount of heart disease in our family, and there is a gene that does control how your body absorbs cholesterol. And I don't have the worst gene, but I have there's 4 genes that do that. I have the second worst gene. So stress can restrict the heart. And I actually was forced to, well, not really, but encouraged, and I did take the Dean Ornish class at Sarasota Memorial Hospital for reversing heart disease. And people in the class were going, wait, why are you in this class? You exercise more than any of us ever hoped to. You eat the right diet. And I said, because I have been told I need to learn how to meditate. And I've taken meditation classes, but doing it on a daily basis was the challenge. And when you do that, it affects your heart. It does make it slow down. And even as an athlete, I have a very low resting heart rate, but it still was not enough to meet the numbers they wanted to see. And so this is my message. And I put the 24 hours of the day into getting enough rest. That also affects your heart rate and how well your blood flow is. I have the heart ejection factor below an 18-year-old. That's where they stop grading it. So there are really good things about my heart and my lungs, but it's this level of stress. I want to lead by example, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time to do what I do. And people generally don't understand that. And so, I will take time and do things like this where we can talk. And I'm happy to share how I do what I do, as I'm a certified personal trainer, certified running coach. So there are a lot of people who are coming to me and saying, I want to be you when I grow up. And it's not just something that you can say, okay, I'm here. How do I do it? People ask, can I run a marathon if I work with you? And I'll go, have you run 2 half marathons? I mean, there are all these steps that you have to take before you get to this point. And to maintain your level of fitness, it is about diet, but it's also about coming up with a routine that works. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I think there's a lot of room for all of us. And however, the reason I've written 6 completely different books, none of them, except for 2 that are sort of fitness related, have anything to do with the other. And the first book, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, I got this idea when I worked at Smith Barney. Anheuser-Busch came out with an annual report one year that said, we're socially responsible. And it's like they learned that by recycling not only their own company's cans, but other companies' cans, that they could make a lot of money doing that and then call themselves socially responsible. All of a sudden, they could slap on that label. So I thought if we could show people how they could save money by crunching the numbers on every single recipe, as I do in that book, with ingredients you can buy at any big box store, then as somebody said to me at the Miami Book Fair one year, I don't know about vegan, but you had me at $4 a day. So that was book number 1. Book number 2, Kitchen Divided, when you live with somebody who doesn't eat the way you do. Book number 3, Paleo Vegan. Paleo is just Atkins all over again. So I wrote the vegan interpretation of it, made a lot of people angry, but then National Geographic a year later came out with a cover story called The Real Paleo Diet, and they practically quoted out of the book saying the world planet can't sustain a diet based around meat and dairy. And then book number 5, Vegan Fitness for, I'm sorry, book 4, Vegan Fitness for Mortals, because I start giving programs based on my training, how you get to this at this age. Then book number 5, Vegan Sex. I co-wrote with a vegan cardiologist, Dr. Joel Kahn, again, going at the heart angle. Blood flow, it's all about blood flow. What's good for the heart is good for other parts. ED is the leading indicator of heart disease by as much as 30 years. If my parents had only known that, I don't know if ED was a factor, but I do know ED was a factor in all of the relationships I had up until the age of 62 when I had my first vegan experience. And it was so different and mind-blowing. I thought, I've got to write a book on that. And I like to joke, if vegan sex doesn't work out, then my last book is Vegan for One, single serving recipes that cover all the nutrition you need if you live alone, like most of us in the world do now.
Thank you for that great answer, but we touched on one subject that I'd like to follow up on. Blood fats, dietary blood fats, the science of blood fats. It seems to me, I'm wondering if you agree or disagree. It seems to me that the science of dietary fats and blood fats are completely misunderstood, are not settled. They're all over the place. Every few days there's a new study comes out and they seem to be credible, but they're all contradictory. First, the coconut oil was supposed to be so good for you, and then no, wait a minute, it's not good for you, but wait, because all the people in the world that eat primarily coconut oil have no heart disease. So what's going on? And do you agree with me? And please expound if you can, that this is one area.
Great topic. Yeah, it's a tough one. And, I always preface things like this by saying I'm not a registered dietitian. I'm not a doctor. However, I have been, for lack of a better word, a disciple of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. That's Dr. Neil Barnard's group. They came up with the power plate. I actually did media consulting for them, sniffed my way into their kitchen one year, and they were developing the curriculum for the Cancer Project, which is now their Food for Life program that I recertified with them to get my license to be able to teach their classes. They now require a license. When I first started doing it, they didn't. But the answer of fats, and Dr. Barnard has weighed in on this PCRM. Dr. Greger has some videos up on it. I mean, when you say credible source, I mean, there's studies all over the map, and unless you know, as a reporter following the money, who paid for it, it is challenging to know these days. And as a former reporter, I kind of cringe at this, what is true and what isn't. So there are so many organizations out there that are, for lack of a better phrase, on the take or getting money from questionable sources. So the sources I've stayed with all of these years have been places like Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Greger, and then of course Dean Ornish, who, the fact that he has a vegan program that's being taught by mainstream hospitals now, I mean, wrap your head around that. How cool and credible is that? So as far as fats go, and this is the example I always come back to, Mother Nature in her infinite wisdom came up with, all the different colors of the rainbow here. This is the nutrition rainbow that PCRM has come up with, and just all these different antioxidants and fruits and vegetables that have the different colors of the rainbow in it, because they were meant to attract our mind's eye so that we would reach for those purple grapes, not to put them in alcohol. But of course, that would be good news about our bad habits if we did that. But it's the resveratrol, the purpleness, that Mother Nature wanted to make sure we were attracted to. As far as nuts go, Mother Nature put those things generally in shells that are really hard to open. So that by the time you got the first one open, popped it in your mouth, and started working on the second one, your brain's already starting to get a message that, yeah, I think I'm getting full. And same thing with the coconut. But here, my putting on my best investigative reporter's hat to figure out the truth about food, because that's always what this has been about, because I didn't want to end up like everybody else in my family. I was terrified. If you are already diagnosed with heart disease, the vegan doctors that I trust out there say, you really need to watch your saturated fats, especially if you have one of those mean, nasty genes that doesn't process cholesterol very well. And my father and his two sisters had like these fatty deposits in the corners of their eyes. And I always thought that was strange, but never gave it really a second thought until I figured out with these genes, they probably had the worst possible gene for processing cholesterol. The bodies didn't process it at all, which is one of the reasons they had so much heart disease. They're eating all these steak and meats that contribute to cholesterol not being processed in the body. So again, a very long-winded answer. I'm not an expert on that. In terms of Dr. Greger, I just watched a video this week. I think it's one of his newer videos where he talks about the blue zones are gone, except for the Loma Linda group, which is the Seventh-day Adventists. So they're really the only ones who have not had a diet that's been westernized. He says all the other ones were. He said they were great 50 years ago, but then McDonald's and KFC and everything else came into their world. And so the blue zones, where you talk about the coconuts being a part of the diet, what else were they doing? And that's the thing you have to look at. Were they exercising? Most of the blue zones were above 10,000 feet. So, the air was thinner. Their lungs had to develop in a way that was different so they could breathe better. And that's why many runners train at altitude, because it just conditions your lungs in a better way. But also living at 10,000 feet, they're doing a lot of exercising, whether they want to or not. They're not driving around in their cars because most likely they didn't have them. The kinds of things that kept the blue zones consistent. And the other thing they had, which I always find fascinating, nothing to do with veganism really, is that they have intergenerational living. And that is just, the emotional component of having a healthy heart is just a whole nother story. I think there are studies that show vegans generally don't get as cranky and depressed as non-vegans, although in a world that seems like it's imploding by the second, it's hard to keep your cheery attitude sometimes.
I don't get depressed, and I don't let stress. I have a good resistance to stress, so I'm advantaged that way. But I grew up in Lower New York, and it was a rough neighborhood. But I'm lucky, as I say, I don't have most average people's level of stress. I have a natural way to deflect it. Yeah. But anyway, so I was going to wrap this up. I was going to ask you for any closing remarks, and also if you want to mention your website or websites or anything you'd like to sell, go right ahead and do so.
Oh, you're sweet. I never really, even though I've in my past been good at sales, I just talk about the message and feeling good. It's about, you talked about how long did my parents live? The quality of life for them, they probably spent more time in pain and suffering than they did having a life that was devoid of that. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do, is I want to help people avoid the pain, excruciating pain and suffering that I have seen. I spent my childhood in hospitals watching them all just die long, slow, painful, excruciating deaths. And it doesn't have to happen. Not that a vegan diet is 100% across the board, prevents, everything from crooked teeth to whatever. It's just, it works though for so many people. I know that PCRI when I'm just getting my license to teach for them again, they do focus on health exclusively because it takes a lot of time and information to get it right. There are a lot of unhealthy vegans out there, and you're right, they don't care. They're just helping the animals. And if that's their perspective, great. We got to get more vegans, however we get there, because again, the planet doesn't have a whole lot of time if you believe in science and follow those numbers. So my website is vegcoach.com. I'm all over social media, YouTube, Ellen Jaffe-Jones. I know the Zoom, I just got a new computer, so it just automatically defaulted to Ellen Jones, but Ellen Jaffe-Jones is my handle pretty much everywhere. Vegcoach.com is my website for contacting me, which is, I do a lot of work for Get Set Up. It's a big online platform, free classes for seniors. So I teach fitness classes there. And I also teach at LA Fitness in Southwest Florida.
Well, that's great.
Aerobics classes.
I'm so glad that we could have this session together. I can't thank you enough. And maybe we'll get to do it again sometime.
All right. Well, thank you for your 40 minutes, Izzy, and good luck to everything you're doing. Thank you so much for having me.
And of course, I'll send you a link once this thing is up on the internet.
Okay,
Have a
great.
great
Thank
day,
you.
Ellen. Thanks again.
You too, Izzy. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.